Hi folks, in this video I'm sharing some of my experiences and knowledge with newcomers who want to get into solar energy. There is also some information which may appeal to those who already have experience with solar energy. I hope this video helps someone out there. I'm going to go ahead and start with number one, which I would call the reality of solar. All the ads and infomercials like to make it appear as if you can just throw a few panels on your roof and off you go. The reality is actually much more complicated. Many of these companies are just trying to entice people to take out a large loan to get some solar panels on their roof and maybe some equipment installed in their garage. They promote this as a fantastic way to go solar. You don't need to run up a massive pile of debt to get into solar, and you don't need to listen to any company or any ad that is telling you that you need to get a huge loan and get a whole big setup and go into debt for many years and it'll pay for itself. The statement that the system will pay for itself is totally speculative, and you don't even know if you'll own that property in 10 to 25 years. Better to take the smart and independent route, do some self-education, and take the time to learn and better yourself, and also save a huge pile of money. The first thing you should be thinking about is research and self-education. Do not depend on a popular figure or some infomercial or ad or some company or some salesman to educate you. You have to do that yourself because those people just want to make money off of you and hopefully run you up for a big sale and you get a big pile of debt. The reality of solar is that if you want to have a decent sized system, you're really better off educating yourself and becoming independent and not depending on a company or some third party to take care of you. It's better to learn it yourself and network with other people who are similar and like mind. And finally, it's actually quite difficult to run an entire normal house in the United States off of solar without giving up a lot of stuff. Your hot water heater, your electric dryer, your electric furnace if you have one. There are different appliances in your home that can use massive amounts of electricity, and you either have to have massive arrays of solar panels or a massive battery bank, and there's no cheap way out. It's all expensive, and so usually most people who use solar to power their homes end up using a grid tie system, or they are willing to sacrifice and give up a lot of the technology and a lot of the benefits that they have become accustomed to in order to get their house disconnected from the power company and use only solar power. So I like to give a solution instead of just stating the problem. The reality of solar, my solution to that is go ahead and start small and have a backup power system. Think of it like a solar generator. So instead of using a gasoline generator, which by the way is nice to have if you have it, but remember gasoline requires electricity to pump and it can run out. It's better to start at the entry level, build a decent sized system for backup purposes and for preparedness. That way if there's a storm or a major catastrophe, your new hobby is actually going to be invaluable and it's going to provide at least some basic utility power, and it won't be tethered to the gas station. You won't need to wait in line for gas or worry about bad gas or anything like that or changing the oil in your generator. You can still have a generator. It will just be a backup to your backup. So if you're new to solar and you're just getting started, doing some research and some basic self-education and building a small system with off-the-shelf parts is a fantastic opportunity to learn new things. Or you can buy one of those solar generators, as they're called, which is just a box with a battery and all the electronics you need in them, and a couple of solar panels, and hook that up. It's not too difficult, and something like that, if it works well, it's a good quality brand, will serve you very well indeed, for years to come, hopefully. I've been in solar for many years, and I certainly know how to build my own system, but I just love solar generators because they're portable, very convenient, and they just have a lot of different uses. And for somebody who doesn't want to do a lot of technical work, doesn't want to connect wires or do anything complicated, a solar generator makes a fantastic way to dip your foot into solar without getting too complicated and too technical, and I highly recommend them. The downside is there's so many of them, and some of them are not very good brands. They may not work very well, so that can be a little bit problematic, trying to find the right one. But again, you can do research, look at reviews, talk to other people who are of like mind and find out what their experiences were, and you'll probably find a good system that works for you. No, you can't run your whole house off of one, generally speaking, unless it's a very large one, but you'll have enough power to run your internet, charge your phone, have lights, and just basic things that you really don't want to do without. And this could continue over a period of months. The solar generator is going to continue putting out power, and it will continue recharging itself, and you won't have to worry about waiting in line for gas. Okay, number two, acquiring solar panels. It's very common for people to go out and shop used solar panels. Now, I've had the experience of shopping for and buying used solar panels. I don't say it was a good experience, and having been through that process, I would absolutely recommend just buying a brand new high quality solar panel or solar panels. And if you're going to keep them for 10, 20, or 30 years, honestly, it's better to go ahead and just buy brand new ones and take really good care of them. That way you know where they've been, you know what they've been through, you know how they've been cared for, and there's no mysteries. If you buy used solar panels, you never know what you're getting into. And I can't overemphasize that point. In other words, I've been there and done that. Number 3. This is something I don't hear a lot of people talking about. The most vulnerable part of a solar panel is actually behind it. Not the front where the glass is, but the back. One of the most common causes of solar panel failure is actually a failure of the backing, or the epoxy casing that's behind the solar panel, or it's also called the encapsulation. If you've ever looked behind a solar panel, the white color is what we would call the encapsulation material, or it's an epoxy. Sometimes it's black in color, but this is by far the most vulnerable part of the panel, and it's hard to get to because usually if you have the panel mounted, say, on the roof of a house, you can't really see underneath, but you really need to be inspecting that at least once a year because many cases failures start right there and you can't see them, and if you don't catch them in time, you may not be able to make a repair. Of course, it's not always possible to repair panels that have started this type of failure. I never place solar panels on the roof of a building because that stops me from maintaining them and inspecting them. I know it's very popular and sometimes you have no choice, but if you have a choice, you should go for a ground mount solar array because that will allow you to keep an eye on them. It's also easier to clean them, and if you do need to make a repair, at least they're on the ground and not on the roof of some building. Solar panel connectors. Believe it or not, this is one of the top failure points on a solar panel array. The most common that I've seen is MC4 type connectors. And the problem is that they all come from different factories, they have different molds, and the metal connector part inside is often a little bit different, and so they really aren't necessarily cross-compatible. If you buy one brand of panel and another brand of cables, there is no guarantee whatsoever that they will fit. A savvy user of solar panels will always be aware of the connectors and be on the lookout for things such as loose fit, sparking and arcing, melting, heat, and then there's the good old classic, the wire fell out of the back of it. If you aren't paying attention and aren't aware of these things, you could actually have a fire or some kind of catastrophe. So it's important to keep an eye on the connectors and be aware of the quality control issues. If you have a solar panel array that is a fairly low voltage, let's say 40 to 50 volts DC in total, not per panel, but in total, you can actually use your hands to feel the wires and the connectors. If you feel any heat while the solar panel array is in operation, this is usually a bad sign. It could mean you're running too much current or amperage through the connectors and or the wires. It could also mean you have a loose crimp. It could mean you have a bad fitting plug, and this is extremely common when you have two brands of MC4 connectors that just don't mate correctly. Last but not least, I have seen cases where solar panels were delivered brand new from the factory with the MC4 connectors reversed in their polarity. This means that positive and negative are backwards, and there would be no obvious labeling or any tip-off of this condition unless you're paying attention. You can use a voltmeter to do a polarity check, and you should really be doing this on every new panel if you buy a large batch of them. The next thing that solar panels do that can really get you is they usually have bypass diodes inside the junction box. Sometimes there's one, sometimes there's two, and unfortunately these are very, very commonly known to fry or to melt and burn. Although this may seem rather obscure, having in your possession a package of good quality diodes, which can be used for bypass diodes in the solar panel junction box, is a smart idea. It will only cost you a few dollars, and if you do have one of these diodes fail and short out, you don't want to go down because of a 30-cent part. If your bypass diodes are getting extremely hot, they're probably faulty and or underrated for the purpose and will eventually fail. Since the diodes are closed up inside the junction box, they have no real cooling, they are highly likely to fail, so it's a good idea to keep an eye on this thing. Most people don't pay a lot of attention to them, but I think it's quite important to keep an eye on them and check them once in a while. Next, another solar panel gotcha is care and handling of solar panels. Believe it or not, if the solar panel is bigger than, say, 100 watts, it's actually incredibly easy to damage the panel without even knowing it. How do you avoid this problem? You're probably expecting me to say, put on kid gloves, use pillows, and be very careful with your panels, how you handle them, how you move them, and you would not be wrong. That's a good idea. But the real secret is to avoid those cheap panels you can buy on certain online sites that have a very thin frame. In other words, not the width and not the height, but the depth of the frame. This is usually where manufacturers cut corners. When the frame has a very shallow depth, unfortunately, this makes the panel extremely weak and extremely vulnerable to mishandling, and even if you do handle it properly, that skinny little frame with thin, cheap aluminum where they cut corners is not going to support the solar cells properly. The individual solar cells are literally as fragile as a potato chip, or even more fragile, and any flex in the frame and in the glass will cause cracking. Also micro cracks that you can't even see or that are not apparent when you first look at the cell, and you wouldn't even know it was damaged. If you've ever handled a large solar panel, picked it up and moved it around and heard a very quiet crackling sound, what you're actually usually hearing is the solar cells themselves being cracked and damaged. Now, this does not necessarily mean the solar panel will be destroyed, but it could affect its output, and it could cause visible effects on the solar cells themselves. Hopefully, though, the solar panel will still work, and you just need to be more careful with it. So it's important to handle solar panels carefully, use proper mounting techniques, and don't flex or bend the panels any more than is necessary. But it's also important to avoid, if at all possible, the thin and cheap solar panels that have a minimal frame with very thin metal that does not properly support and protect the cells. If you buy a solar panel like that, I'm certainly not knocking it. I have many budget panels in my collection, but you must know that you have to be very, very careful with these panels because they're not properly supported and they're incredibly easy to damage. By the way, used solar panels are incredibly likely to be damaged in this way because they've been handled, they've been thrown all over the place, they've been in the back of a truck, stacked and restacked on pallets, and so you never know what you're getting into. I'm not against buying used solar panels. I've bought them before, but I had my regrets. So I really don't recommend used solar panels. And yet another reason is you never know how they've been handled or what they've been through before you were able to get your hands on them. You can certainly save a lot of money buying used panels, but you really got to pay attention so that you don't get ripped off by some seller who just wants to make a buck. The next item I'm going to cover is the label that's usually on the back of a solar panel. These labels represent a test at the factory using standard test conditions, or STC. With a good high quality panel, it can be possible to get near those specifications when the panel is brand new and aimed directly at the sun. You may see less current and less voltage and less power than what the label says you should get. In my experience, the cheaper solar panels often come nowhere near the label, and in fact, they may perform like a much smaller solar panel relative to their size. And it's pretty easy to make a label in some factory overseas and make all sorts of claims and statements about it, so buyer beware. Just because the label says this thing or that thing does not mean that is what you're going to experience. If you're going to buy a large batch of solar panels, sometimes it's better to get a sample, test them, and then make a decision on whether to buy the quantity. You can also look at reviews before buying. The next topic is putting solar panels in series. It seems that there is a general belief in the market that if you put more solar panels in series, it's better, right? No, that's actually incorrect. It does not mean it's better because you have a higher system voltage with more solar panels in series. Not necessarily. It depends on your use case, whether to put them in series or parallel or a combination. If you have only a 12-volt battery, it makes no sense at all to run a 150-volt array voltage unless you have a very, very long run of wire in between the solar panels and the charge controller. The higher the DC voltage, the more danger of electrocution. 120 volts DC at 10 amps is going to cause you major problems if you ever make a mistake and contact a live wire with your hand. The fact is, it is dangerous to put solar panels in series to build up the voltage if you don't know what you're doing. Even if you do know what you're doing, it's still dangerous. If you have a very, very long wire run between the solar panel array and the charge controller, you should build up the voltage. If you have a rather short wire run in between the charge controller and the solar panel array, building up the voltage is not as important. You might go up to 50 or 60 volts. This is a relatively safe voltage and is probably not going to cause any harm if you make a mistake. However, if you're running a very large solar panel array, you will need to make sure and use thick wire because your current is going to be much higher. If you have a very high battery voltage, say 72 or 84 or 96 volts or higher, then you have no choice but to put the solar panels in series to build up the voltage because your battery voltage is very high. But if you have, say, a 12 or 24 volt battery and you purchase an MPPT charge controller, it makes no sense to have a open circuit array voltage many times higher than the battery, because believe it or not, the MPPT charge controller is nothing more than a standard DC-DC converter with a computer board which monitors the input. The higher your array voltage is above your battery voltage, the more inefficient the charge controller could potentially be. So ideally, you don't want the loaded array voltage of the solar panels to be too far above the maximum voltage of your battery, because the more it exceeds this voltage, the more inefficiencies you're introducing through the charge controller. Next topic. Believe it or not, solar energy is not cheaper than the power company can provide. Cycling expensive lithium-ion batteries, buying huge sets of solar panels, massive powerful inverters, and huge expensive charge controllers, and all the fuses and infrastructure and wiring that you're going to need to go along with that cannot compete with what the power company calls economies of scale. They can crank out kilowatt hours of electrical energy for 10 to 20 cents per kilowatt hour. That's their cost to you. But if you do the math in an honest way, you probably will never be able to get to 10 cents per kilowatt hour. The cost will always be much, much higher. Plus, you're the guy putting out the initial investment in the system. The power company has that covered. With a grid-tied system, it is quite possible to pay for your inverter in 3 to 5 years, depending on all the different numbers. But once you start cycling batteries, adding in charge controllers, inverters, and so forth, it gets a lot more difficult to reach those kind of numbers. So in short, in my opinion, it has nothing to do with saving money. That might be a secondary objective. It's really about freedom, independence, and the ability to produce your own electrical power on your own terms. And the final topic, number 10, I'm calling it, this is the big one, how much versus how long. Can't count the number of times I've seen or heard someone say, yeah, I plugged my air conditioner in and I ran it for like a whole 30 minutes and I cooled off my room and it was so awesome and it didn't cost me anything. It's free energy from the sun. My room was nice and cool for a whole half hour. It is actually not very difficult these days to get an inverter and a battery and run a fairly powerful appliance for a short time. What I don't see is a lot of folks measuring the cumulative long-term consumption of the appliances they want to run. The smart and savvy solar user, when doing his research, is always going to calculate the kilowatt-hour usage of his appliance or appliances over a 24-hour period and over a 30-day period, and even over a 3 or 6 month period. This is a good way to get in contact with the reality of solar. How much energy are you going to need to do something, say for 30 minutes, and also how much energy is it going to take to keep doing that day after day, week after week, month after month. If you actually sit down and make a spreadsheet or a calculation sheet of the long-term cumulative energy draw of a typical appliance, you would be shocked. Even a small fan or device can use up quite a bit of power, and it really adds up. When dealing with the long-term cumulative power requirements of an appliance or device, the main 3 factors to keep in mind are your budget, the size of your battery bank, and the power output or size of the solar array. Understanding how these 3 factors work together or against each other, if you want to look at it that way, is a key part of understanding what exactly it costs to use solar, how much money are you going to have to spend, and really how realistic or achievable is your goal for energy independence. I hope this video helped someone. If it does, be sure to leave me a note and let me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.